All right, we're gonna get started, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, hi Raynor.
Yes.
So
Yes, I can hear you.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mute everyone. If you have a question or you can't hear me, mute yourself.
I can hear you.
Okay,
I can hear you, Raynor.
no problem. If
Hi everyone, it's me, Morel.
Hi, Morale.
so what I'm gonna do is I believe I muted everyone. Um, so we don't have a lot of people, a lot of background noise. You should hear me. If at any point in time you cannot hear me, just raise your hand and then I will adjust the settings. So you have a raise your hand function, and then I will adjust the settings. So I'm going to share my screen now. We have a lot to talk about today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So today we're going to talk about lesson planning and core competencies. Um, and it's centered around um, what we need to do, what is most important, or the most important things we need to do as educators. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is an introduction. My name is Ray Roberts. I am the managing partner of the academic partnership, and the academic partnership has been in operation since 2009, and we have been servicing students from all around the world. Um, and currently, our main focus is in the Middle East, but we do support Africa and Southeast Asia, amongst other places. Um, so what's happening here? We're going to have three 90-minute sessions. That's going to be a journey. It's going to be it's going to be a journey and a lot of information. So please, I hope you brought some water and you brought your boots and your backpack, because we're going to go on a hike. We're going to go on an exploration. And I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. I'm going to throw a lot of information. So be prepared for that. The key here is not to uh, for you to learn all of this in one swoop and in this one hand. The key here is that we start to tap into the variables that are most important to us being the best educators that we possibly can. So why lesson planning and core competencies? Well, I have to be honest. I kind of gave you guys some false advertising. We will talk about lesson planning, but lesson planning will be the what we do in the conversation. So it's the lesson planning is to allow us to uh, frame our thinking. So what we're really talking about is core competency, which we're about to get into in a second. But the lesson planning throughout the three sessions it's a framework, um, and I want you, and it's just something tangible that you can use. So if you're not the greatest lesson planner in the world, um, this session can help you. Um, this session is about making us long-term effective educators, not short-term, and we're going to get into that shortly. The goal is to get us to rethink who we are as educators, um, via formal and consistent reflection. So that's the overall goal. I'm trying to get you guys to reflect on what you did. Think about your teaching, moving from teacher to practitioner. And that's the ultimate goal of these three sessions, is to move you guys from teacher to practitioner. And for those people who are already on that journey, to help to walk with you, because it's a journey. It's a journey. Um, we're going to do a lot of research, meaning we're going to discuss a lot of research, but we're going to tap into it very lightly. I'm going to give you books at the end of this presentation that you can follow up. You guys can do your own research. That's what this is about, is to motivate you to start doing some research and thinking about what you do as teachers. Now, a lot of you are going to listen to this talk today, and you're going to say, Ray, I can't do this in my school. You know, the parents won't let me do this. I don't have time to do this. I have 30 students. It's Mr. Ray, you don't understand. The principal won't let, the principal says I must do this. I don't have time to fit that in. And my response to you is, I understand, I feel you. And if you've taken my TESOL course, there's an expression that I have, and that's the golden rule. And what I want you to think about is that the golden rule is no excuse. And for those who don't know the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. And that's a big conflict for many of you guys. It's a huge conflict. You said, Mr. Ray, all this stuff sounds nice, but I don't have the time to apply it. And what I'm saying to you is, you do have the time to apply it. You have to make the time to apply it so we can become better educators, and we can really start to make influences in our schools. We can start to be the driving force in our schools. And then my last point in the introduction here is, please take notes. I know a lot of you may ask for the slides after this, and the slide, and I have no problem giving the slides. However, your notes are going to be more effective, because your notes are going to be based on your reflection of what you're going to take notes on, what you feel is most important, and the responses you have to what I'm saying. And a lot of you may disagree with what I'm saying or challenge what I'm saying. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. I'm not asking you to, I'm not the preacher here, and you guys are not the congregation. We're having a discussion. Unfortunately, based on the platform, I have to lead the discussion. We will have opportunities for questions and answers and comments at certain points in the discussion. But I really want you to take notes, and the notes should be reflective, and we're going to talk about reflection. And the last point, if you do have a question, write it down. When it's question time, I'm going to, then you can ask your question. All right? So I don't see anyone's hands up, so we'll continue to move on. So basically, here's our agenda for today. Now, I changed it a little bit here, or actually a lot of it. As I was looking at my presentation and thinking about and reflecting on my presentation. So this is a little bit different than the email I sent out. So the first thing we're going to talk about is teacher core competency and what that means. What do I mean by that? The next thing we're going to talk about is the importance of teacher reflection. We're going to tap into some research, post-method condition. We're going to talk about EDEK and EDEK. We're going to talk about first order thinking and second order thinking. We're going to dive back into some more research. Then we're going to take a break, a little brain break. The breaks are going to be 2 minutes long. Then we're going to dive back into fashion statements and education. We're going to talk about Rich Hart's 8 forces that we must consider in the classroom. We're going to talk about backwards mapping and the considerations for backwards mapping and why that's important. We're going to take another 2 minutes, have a question and answering session, comment session, and then dive into lesson planning as it relates to what we talked about. That's a lot of information, So let's go ahead and dive into it. All right, so first slide here, we have superheroes, right? Some of you may be too intellectually advance for cartoons and superheroes, but uh, I still love my cartoons. And the great thing about superheroes is that, every last one of these superheroes, they stand on something. They stand on values that are dear to them. Batman, his parents was murdered in front of his face, and he committed his life to making Gotham better, to fighting crime as a result of his personal experiences. He dedicated he and dedicates, if you actually believe there's a Batman, his time and energy to fighting crime. Man had experiences that allow him to dedicate him fighting crime. Spider-Man had experiences, I think, with his uncle, so on and so forth. Captain America, Wonder Woman, they all stand on a set of values. They all stand on a set of values, which are their core competencies. Okay, so when we talk about core competencies, I want you to think about superheroes and why they fight the fight that they fight. Because the reality is, you are a superhero. You are absolutely a superhero. So you have to ask yourself, what fight are you fighting and why? Now, this is very important. And this is important because this is what companies do. Companies take the big corporations throughout the world, they take on core competencies. Okay. Amazon, Google, Apple, they have core competencies. They know the reasons why they're in business. And this is why they're thriving. Okay. Netflix right now currently is ruling the online streaming industry because they have a set of core competencies. They know exactly what they want to deliver to their customers. They know how they want to deliver it, and as a result, they create a product that that many subscribers enjoy and find entertaining because they operate on a set of core competencies. Amazon has literally taken over the digital space and interrupting, and it really put retail on top of its head because they have a set of core competencies. They know they want to deliver products to their customers of high value in a certain amount of time. That's their core competencies. And everything they do is centered around that. So I'm asking you, what are your core competencies? So when we look at core competencies, there's some elements that businesses think about. And I think teachers should think about them also. Why? Because teachers are businesses. And we're going to talk about this very briefly. And it's going to be the main point of the second session. Teachers as a business, especially in this age of access in 2019, you are business teachers. So you have to really think about what separates you from the teacher next door to you. What separates you from the other people that have an online presence like you? Why is your service better than their service? What makes your service different than their service? Are you doing the same things as other people? And if you are, why? And what differentiates you from everyone else? These are core competencies. How do you see your clients? How do you see your students? What service do you provide that's unique? How do you communicate differently than the rest of the competition? How do you think differently, creatively, versus your competition? How do you think critically versus your competition? What is your identity as it relates to the people you serve? One of the biggest problems that we have as educators that people just don't respect us. And the reason why they just don't respect us is, for me, actually, there are many reasons. One is they have a bad taste in their mouth because they have bad experiences in their learning experience. So in their realm of learning, they had teachers that they just didn't like. They had schools and experiences within that school setting that really turned them off. Teachers said some things, that made them really dislike the profession. And then we're not doing anything in 2019 to change those perceptions. So when we talk about core competencies, you have to really think about what what is positive about your personality, what is positive about your identity within the learning community. How are you aware? Do you have personal awareness? Are you self-regulated? uh, or do you come on time? Do you say that do you do what you say you're going to do? What responsibility do you take? And then overall, what social responsibility do you have to the school? What social responsibility do you have to your students? What social responsibility do you have to the community? These are the these are the things that businesses and corporations are doing all throughout the world, and new age businesses. And the businesses and corporations that are not doing these things, they are falling, they are failing. In America, we had a major company called Blockbuster, and they were the leading video rental service in the country. Blockbuster. People would, drive and rent a video, would drive, go to Blockbuster and rent a video. And Blockbuster is no longer in operation because companies like Netflix, mainly Netflix, had a set of core competencies that overtook Blockbuster. Blockbuster wasn't thinking about their core competencies. $1 billion company that could have easily gotten to the streaming business, but no, they weren't thinking about the larger picture. They weren't using second order thinking. They were using first order thinking, and therefore they're no longer in business, and they were overtaken by a smaller company, which is now a larger company. So I want you to think about your core competencies. Why are you a teacher? What can you deliver that's different than other teachers that's doing the same thing as you? So what makes me say that? What makes me say this is that the times are changing. They are changing. We're not in 1893 any longer. So let me tell you briefly what I mean by this. In 1893, there was the Committee of 10 that met in America. And for the most part, the findings of that Committee of 10, those findings on how curriculum would be developed, what we would teach kids, students, how we would teach them, the format, the boundaries, all those things we still use today in 2019. So we're using a very antiquated system that's expired. We're using a system, theories, and methodologies in some cases that are as old as 1893. Can you imagine? In the age of access? And then we're wondering why we're failing our students. And we're wondering why we've been failing our students for a very long time. We as educators are not changing with the times. Companies are changing with the time. Industry is changing in time. But for some reason, the education has not changed with the time. Another reason why you need to develop your core competencies is that the times are changing, and we're living in a zero marginal cost society. And basically what that means, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, is that we're living in a society now where things are free, where things are very low cost. So just to make it simple for you, think about YouTube for a second, or even think about Amazon. I'll give you an example. I was watching a YouTube channel about Tesla cars, and the individual in that channel, he was getting a free Tesla. Okay, this is recently. He's getting a free Tesla. The Tesla is worth $250,000. Let me say that again. The Tesla is worth $250,000 that he's getting for free. Why? Because he has so many subscribers that had, as a result of his channel, that had bought Teslas. So Tesla is now, Elon Musk is giving him a free car. And it's not just him, it's they have a program for people who are influencers who have a lot of subscribers can get a free $250,000 sports car. In fact, the fastest battery ran car in the world is this Tesla that they're getting, limited edition. That happens in a zero marginal cost society. And it's just not for Teslas, it's everything you buy. When you buy something from Amazon, when you buy something from eBay or SEMUCC.com, the reason why you're getting it at such a low cost is because Amazon has so many subscribers. The reason why Netflix will only charge you $12 to watch unlimited movies is because they have so many subscribers, and because the internet allows for the reduction of costs. Okay, it's different than when you have to get a truck, have a truck driver drive this fuel, airplanes, and labor costs and warehousing. When you can deliver a service via the internet, that reduces costs, and those costs benefit everyone, including consumers. And this is the reason why we're moving away from capitalism in the world, because of zero marginal cost. Things, services, and products being offered for very reduced cost, um, and in some cases for free because of the internet. So this idea of subscribers plus the internet equals free. The other thing I can think about is the kid Ryan from Ryan's Toy Review. How much did Ryan make this year? I think he's 9 years old now. His parents, $22 million. How was YouTube able to cut Ryan a check for $22 million? Because Ryan has a certain amount of subscribers. He gets a certain amount of views per video that he posts, which allows for sponsors, which pay YouTube, and YouTube is able to share those costs to Ryan. And again, it's not just Ryan, it's all of those influencers. That's the word they use now, right? Influencers online. Online is not the future, it's the now. People are changing their careers. People are deciding they're not going to university because of the internet. We have to embrace that as teachers, and we have to figure out what our core competencies are, because the reality is brick and mortar education is dying, and it's dying very fast. So as a result, the opportunities to teach in a brick and mortar setting are dwindling. That means we have to have core competencies in order to get a job in a brick and mortar school or learning environment. But moreover, we're going to be forced to teach online. And with teaching online comes the likes and the dislikes. So what are your core competencies going to be? How people are going to review you? How are you going to communicate with people? What is your social responsibility going to be? I challenge you guys to really look at YouTube and see how people are operating on YouTube. Look at their ideas of core competencies, of social responsibility, how they deal with one another, how they are very keen on getting subscribers, are they very keen on having positive comments. We have to think about that as teachers. Long are the days where we stand as the kings and queens of our classrooms. Those days are over. So we have to really decide what our core competencies. No, the experiences are shared now because of the internet. I used to have teachers in my school district when I was in grade school, and I remember several teachers saying to me, "I got mine. You have to get yours." That's no longer the case in 2009. That experiences are shared now. They're no longer property. Uh, I got my PhD. I have my PhD. I have my master's degree. That doesn't matter now in 2009. Why? Because people are becoming just as successful without master's degrees. People can now go online and learn a la carte what they need to learn so they can provide for their families and take care of themselves. Jeremy Rifkin calls it localization. Localization. Instead of globalization, he calls it localization, meaning that in this age of access, in this age of online, it's about small communities and being able to meet the needs of individuals, not this global thing that people talk about, globalization. Yes, we're living in a globalized world, but in that globalized world, you have to have a presence locally, communities. So what I mean by that, if you look at YouTube, yes, you may have somebody from Japan talking to someone from Texas, and they're going to meet and they're going to make money together, and they're going to build content together, and they're going to produce videos and sell merchandise. Although one person's in Japan and the other is in Texas, but they're local in their core competencies. They're local in their values. So as teachers, we need to really jump on that train because again, it's not the future, it's the right now. Uh, so so this was, really the core essence that I want you guys to think about as we move on to the research now. So the reality is, in summary, as far as it relates to core competencies, um, teachers, among other professionals, and not just teachers, doctors, lawyers, you name it, service-based people, and even people who work with their hands, because of robotics and AI, we have to be our own corporations now, and we have to figure out what our core competencies are so we can engage social media, whether it's from selling things online, providing services via YouTube, Amazon, Instagram, online teaching, whatever the case may be. Interesting enough, Netflix has now an education division where they're doing Netflix Academy. They're also doing interactive movies. You see in right here, this is what is it? Bandersnatch is their new content they have now, which is interactive content. So here now the viewer can select the experience they had. That's the age of access stuff, guys. Uh, so whether the actor chooses Sugar Puffs or Frosted Flakes, and you can click, and you can do this right now if you have Netflix. You can click on, so you can determine the outcomes. This is where we are in society and in technology, and teachers, we have to jump on that train. All right, so now let's go into the research. Let's go into this research. So uh, as it relates to our core competencies, that means if we need core competencies, if we need to be unique, if we need to be competitive in the space, then we need to start reflecting, and we really need to consider some things about ourselves and our teaching. So I want to start the conversation off by saying this, that that there's no best way to teach. Okay, there's no best method for teaching. Um, Dr. Diane Lawson Friedman says students do not learn because we teach, uh, and the research has proven this. Just because you stand in front of someone or with somebody online doesn't mean you're going to teach them anything. So we have to really then now adjust and consider what we need to do to be effective as educators. Um, the reality is, we can label or we can categorize teaching methodologies in three ways. There's a language-centered method, which is based on form and which is form focused. There's learner-centered methods, which is form and function. And then there's learning-centered methods, which is meaning focused, is what they call the natural approach. But the reality is, these methodologies, and from these methodologies are hundreds of different, strategies and techniques and other methodologies that are birthed from these three. The reality is that they're artificial. If you're in a classroom, you're in an artificial environment, what I call a plastic environment. And relying on one method is not beneficial. Prabhu says that there's no best teaching method, and he's not saying just don't just be rogue, but what he's saying is that you must teach based on who you have in front of you at the moment, based on the conditions at the moment. And as a result of Prabhu, we get the post method condition from Dr. and I always screw this guy's name up, Camaro Vadavulu. Camaro Vadavulu. I think I kind of got it right. Camaro Vadavulu. Well, let's call him Dr. K from now on. Dr. K has created has developed and continues to develop the post method condition. And then in the post method condition, there are three things that we really must consider. When we must consider particularity, that we have unique students. We must consider that in particularity, there's unique context because we have unique students, and that these students have unique goals. We also must consider practicality, that there's academic theory versus teaching theory. And we're going to talk a lot about this in the next couple of minutes. That you, as an educator, it's important that you know the academic theories that are out there. Why? So you can test them out, so you can try them. These are the best, this is how innovation occurs. And what happens is we have educators who have learned one theory or two theories based on where they may have worked or the schools that they have gone to, and they don't really explore all the theories that are out there to test them out. It doesn't mean you have to believe them. As an educator, you need to know what those theories are, try them, and then create a hypothesis. And as a result, you get your own teacher's theory. And that's where Dr. K and a lot of other educators like Donald Freeman, Diane Lawson Freeman, all these guys, Prabhu, they said that the best teaching comes when you create your own theory. This is when the best teaching happens, because your teaching becomes, again, as Prabhu says, indicative for the students that you have in front of you right at that moment. And that requires continuous improvement and continuous and consistent reflection. The other framework for the post-method condition is possibility. And possibility is kind of what I've already talked about, is being brave, exploring, trying new things in your teaching, not staying stuck, not being robotic and static and saying, well, this is the only, I don't want to try anything out. This worked for me the last 3 years. This worked for me in the past. So I'm going to stick with it. When that happens, we fail our students. The reality is we already have inside of us all the qualities of being a good teacher because we were because we were students. Whether we were good or not, it's a different story. But we were students, and we spent many, many years listening and seeing many different styles. So we have those qualities because we've seen them modeled for many, many years. Now we need to take it to the next level and start to think about those qualities and think about those strategies and be knowledgeable about the theories that are out there. Teachers must take what is already known to them based on their prior experience and reflect continuously. Teachers must be autonomous. They must theorize from their practice and practice what they theorize. And this is what Dr. K says. I'm going to say that again because it's very, very important. As we talk about reflection, teachers must theorize what they practice. So basically, you must know the academic theory out there, right? You must know Diane Lawson's complexity theory. You must know Krashen's effective. You must know all those guys that are out there. You must know what Hattie says, and you must try it out. You must test Gardner's multiple intelligence theory. Try it out. See if it works for yourself. Don't be reliant on someone forcing you or telling you what works. You have to figure out what works for yourself because our students are not static. So our teaching cannot be static. Um, it, Autonomous teaching, I want to be careful here. Autonomous teaching doesn't mean that we don't have any borders, that we just go rogue and that we just do whatever we want. What it means is that we are doing what most influence students learning at the moment. Um, that we're grounded in empirical and pedagogical research and experience. So I don't want people to think that you can just go out. Mr. Ray said, just go out and do what I can do. No, you need to know the theory, as I said before. You need to do the research. You need to be continuously reading. You need to know what all these guys say, and then create your own theory from that. And it is never changing. I mean, it's never static. It's always going to change. So it's the never-ending story. Um, the last point I want to make is that the post-method condition is about being student-centered. Everything has to be student-centered. So often, and I do a lot of professional developments, and I've been in education for 18 years now, what we find is that, and what I have experienced is that it's always about what the students need. I mean, what the teacher need. And that teacher fails to look at what the students need. And that's what we need to always do. Whatever we do, it needs to be student focused and student centered. So let's go into another theory here, since we're talking about theory. Dr. Diane Lawson Freeman's complexity theory. And here I have a picture or an image of the movie Groundhog Day. And if you haven't seen this movie, some of you may have seen this movie. The whole point of this movie is that Bill Murray, the main character, he's a weather forecaster, and he's experiencing the same events every day. Every day he's experiencing the same events, and it gives him the opportunity to make changes in his life, and it's not until he makes the right decisions and changes do he actually begin to have different experiences and not experience this perpetual same day, same experience over and over and over again. Well, the reality is that's just a movie. The reality is every day of your life has been different. The reality is every day of your teacher, every class period you've had, every teaching day you had has been different. And what Diane Lawson Freeman is saying is this is complex. That our students and even us as teachers, we live in a very complex world, and we don't know what may happen today or tomorrow. So we need to stop teaching our students in a way that is that is prescriptive, like we can forecast to our students what's going to happen. Okay, that's a different way of thinking. So what complexity theory is really saying is that we need to prepare our students for the challenges of an unseen world. That we need to stop presenting information and stop teaching as if what students will experience will be could be forecast. It cannot be forecast. Again, they're unique individuals. We don't know what path they're going to take. We don't know what experiences they have or going to have. So we need to prepare them for the complexities of their education, of their life, of their work experience, how they deal with people. We need to prepare them for that. So Diane Lawson Freeman says that language is not about conforming, it's really about uniformity. And what I believe she means by that is that, you know, we should stop having students meet standards, okay, and boxing them in. What we should do is make sure that they are uniformed in how they're able to deal with things, that they are adaptable. In fact, she has three main points that she talks about as it relates to dealing with this very complex world. She says that, you know, instead of teaching repetitively, we need to teach based on iteration, right? So, an iteration meaning that uh, uh, we work on a skill, but we look at it from the same skill. We work with different activities from different points of views, from different perspectives, and not repeating the same drill over and over and over and over again. Um, so not drilling our students to death with repetition, but giving them iteration, opportunities to to practice a skill, to practice a concept from many different perspectives. Then she says, in order to prepare students for the complex world is adaptation. That we need students need not only know, but know how to apply what they know in these unseen conditions, in these unseen contexts. So um, uh, we need to prepare them to apply what they know in meaningful ways. Uh, Earl Steve Vicks has a technique that he calls techning, where uh, where it allows teachers to encourage rather students or learners to adapt to what they know. Like for instance, you may have one student stand up and you say, well, you have 4 minutes um, to explain momentum, okay? And then the next student has to will stand up and has 3 minutes to explain momentum. And the next student stands up and has 2 minutes to explain momentum. And this is about adaptation, that we live in this very complex world, that things are not fair. However, we need to prepare students for these unfair events, these unseen events through adaptation. And the last uh, thing that we can do, or acts that we can commit to help students with preparing them for this complex world, is self-referencing. So allowing students to self-referential, meaning that instead of having a standard that everyone's being judged against, that we should judge students based on their individual growth. Okay, so instead of having a yardstick and forcing everyone to compete based on that yardstick, we really need to talk about individual growth. Where where did you start, and now how much did you improve? And once we're able to do that, we're able to identify the needs of students and do proper intervention to help that student grow and progress further. So that's Diane Lawson's complexity theory. I'm really going really quickly over this stuff. We can spend 2 days or a whole course talking about complexity theory, but I'm really just scratching the surface so you guys can really get the idea of reflection and the importance of reflection. So some things that we need to think about as we continue to reflect, knowing that there's no best teaching method, knowing that the world is a very complex place. We also need to really understand and embrace the fact that learning happens through consistency, that it doesn't happen, and it happens over time. It doesn't happen overnight. that everything meaningful happens through consistency, through self-advocacy, through grit, what some people call grit, right? They're going out there and fighting the good fight in this very complex world. And we need to think about these things to establish our core competencies. And in order to do that, we must have consistent reflection, because what reflection ultimately does is it establishes a point of view. And a teacher's point of view is extremely important. And I know a lot of you guys don't feel that way because no one asks you your point of view. And this is the big problem in education, is that we're not asking the teachers, the vital people, the vital piece of the puzzle, their point of view. We're going to talk about that in a second. Donald Friedman says point of view is simply not an opinion, but it lays out about what the author thinks and why. And this is extremely important when we talk about getting reflection, when we talk about improving our teaching. Professional development today is just far too prescriptive. We're telling teachers what they should be doing. You know, professional tells us what we should do, and at the same time, it tells us how to look and how to think and even how to listen. And most professional developments that you probably attended in the last year or two never really ask you your point of view. But our business is understanding. And in order to understand, you have to have a point of view. And that understanding allows for innovation. It allows for the continuous improvement so you can provide the best service for your students. And so Donald Friedman has something called action research, which helps create our core competencies, helps gives us that competitive edge in our teaching. So in action research, there are three kind of ideas that we should look at in action research. And that's the teacher voices, and that's the voices of other teachers around you, okay? Now, why is this important? Well, this guy named John Hattie, he's an Australian researcher, pedagogue, educator, and he does, and we're going to talk about this in a few slides from now, but he says that teacher advocacy is extremely valuable and important to improving our teaching and supporting our students and helping our students learn. So when we talk about reflection, we need to really make sure that we're communicating with other students or with other teachers and understanding what their points of view are. If you remember back to the core competency slides, communication was one of those variables for core competencies. Then framework. Framework is the point of view from the professional community. So that would be the research, reading the books, knowing what Krashen says, knowing what Chomsky says, knowing the latest and greatest thing that comes down the pike. Whether you agree with it or not, you have to know it so you can try it out. These are the frameworks. And then thirdly is the investigation. And the investigation is really about your experience, your point of view, what you see happening in the classroom every day, applying the frameworks, applying and considering other teachers of voices to create your own theories and doing it consistently and making sure that it's not static. Until we're able to do these things, and we create this idea of what researchers call teacher research, right? Until we're able to do this, we'll always be shut out of educational policy. No one will ever ask us what we think. Parents will always disrespect us. We'll always have a problem with students. There'll always be a rift between the administration and the teachers. Until we start communicating and until we start getting core core values, setting core competencies for ourselves, then teachers will always be uh, disrespected in this profession. The most valuable people, well, the most valuable variable is the students, right? But very, very important are the teachers. Critical variable in learning is the teacher. But no one asks us our point of view. There are articles and articles coming out every day about the number of teachers that are quitting in America, about the problems that teachers are facing in South Africa, the issues that teachers are facing in the Middle East. And it's all really an issue of no one's asking teachers their point of view. And the bigger problem is many of us don't have a point of view because we haven't done the action research. We haven't committed ourselves to reflection. Okay, so what Freeman says, knowing how to do things in the classroom is not the same as knowing that they will work. So this is our idea of reflection, second order thinking. Many of us as teachers, we want very prescriptive things. Mr. Ray, show me how to write a lesson plan. Mr. Ray, we need a class. The number one thing I get is we need a class or we need a professional development on classroom management. And I always say, what is that? Classroom management is good teaching. Good teaching is good reflection. But we look at things very first order, and we're going to talk about first order versus second order thinking in a second. But until we start reflecting and thinking about our teaching and thinking long term instead of putting band-aids on issues or just looking at teaching as doing, until we start looking at teaching as a more holistic process, then we're always going to run into problems in our teaching. All right. When we inject research in the activity of teaching, teaching changes. Okay. And Freeman says this. Freeman also says that classrooms are embedded in values and expectations that help shape the teaching and learning that go within. So we also got to keep in mind the reason why reflection is important is because you do have unique individuals in your classroom, and they do have what Ron Richard calls enculturation. They're bringing in their family values, their religion, their social status, all of these things. We must reflect on these things. There's nothing prescriptive that can help. Mr. Ray can't help you. Mr. Ray doesn't have a computer program that can help that. I don't have some strategies that can help that. You have to figure that out for yourself, and you have to continuously figure that out through reflection. All right? And so it's this idea that the teacher has to be a researcher. You have to climb that mountain for yourself. You have to have those experiences for yourself. You have to set those goals. You have to go through that process of climbing that mountain so you can have what they call EDEK. And one of the biggest problems is we haven't developed EDEK, and because we don't have any EDEK, we don't have a point of view. And we're going to talk about EDEK in a second. So there he is, EDEK, EDEK, right? So here's a little cartoon I found. And this says, if you look at what he has on the board, it says, I think you should be a little bit more specific here in step 2. Well, you see all the equations. The equations are what we call more first order thinking, right? They solve problems for the moment. But then in step 2, he has, then a miracle occurs. But what does that mean, right? A miracle occurs, so the equations would be EDEK, and the miracles occurring would be EDEK. And all that means is EDEK is external forces that control what we do. All right. EDEK is internal feelings that control what we do. So EDEK calls for higher order thinking, whereas EDEK calls for immediate solutions that are often not reflective. And what often happens in our teaching what often happens in our teaching is we do a lot of EDEK because we work in environments that are very EDEK based. The principal tells us what to do. The parents tell us what to do. Everyone's telling us what to do. Cambridge comes in and tells us what to do. ETS comes in, advanced ed comes in and tells us what to do. And no one, again, asks the teachers about their point of view. And because no one's asking you about your point of view, you don't develop a point of view. And then it's the ongoing cycle of students not reaching that. We're not reaching or providing the best services for our students, and students being dissatisfied. Why? Because we're not creating EMIC for ourselves. To give you a little bit more objective look at EDIC versus EMIC, think about Starbucks for a second. You go to Starbucks anywhere in the world, and it's going to be the same menu for the most part. The menu doesn't adapt, right? But if you go to McDonald's in different places in the world, the menus adapt based on the country you're in. So that's an example of one business looking at EMIC and the other business looking at their model from an EDIC perspective. Now, what is interesting here is that although Starbucks is a very successful franchise, it has not been as business and has sold as much product as McDonald's. So Starbucks may want to consider looking at the EMIC in McDonald's and start moving away from the EDIC, because there are more and more coffee franchises are coming after Starbucks. Many people have came after McDonald's, and McDonald's is still around. Why? Because they have an EMIC perspective versus an EDIC. Okay. Another example that I saw was this one. I thought this was pretty interesting. Okay, what happened there? Okay, so I thought this was pretty interesting. I found this organizational chart from a school. I guess it's in the Philippines. But look at, this is the point I want to show you. Look at the teachers. Look at small the teacher box is. Now, everybody box, you got the board of trustees, you got the director, the principal, everybody has their nice little picture up. But the poor old teacher, look at that. Small, class advisors, subject teachers, nondescript, not very important, controlled, look at that line there. Controlled by who? The principal. And this is why we fail in education. This is why we have the problems that we have in education is because we look at things from a very EDIC point of view when we need teachers to look at things emically, to think about, and when I talk about EMIC really talks about teacher research, which is Donald Freeman's whole position, is that teachers need to do research. And in a researchable questions are EMIC related questions. How I feel, how a person feels about something. Okay, what do they feel about it? Versus EDIC is an external force. It's first order. What do we do? Versus how do we feel? Okay. All right. Another example of EDIC versus EDIC that try to bring this idea home is I want to tell a real brief story about Stanley Tookie Williams. Stanley Tookie Williams was the co-founder of the feared street gang, the Crips. There's a gang in America called the Blood and the Crips, and they're in operation today. Very, they not a nice group of people, to say the least. And many years ago, Stanley Tookie Williams was convicted of multiple murders, and he was put on death row. While he was on death row, he started writing children's books about gangs and drugs and about life, gang life. his children's books were so effective that he was nominated 4 times for the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Peace Prize. Can you imagine while you're on death row being nominated 4 times? And you ask yourself, why was his books so effective? Well, his books were effective because when he wrote about gang violence, he knew everything about gang violence. He knew every aspect, all the nuances about a gang. He founded one of the most dangerous gangs in America, the Crips. So this man knows all the nuances. He has reflected for many years. He has gone through so many different experiences. He's climbed that mountain. So when he was sitting there on death row, he's able to communicate very amicably on telling children why they should not anybody who's writing on the screen, I don't know what's going on, but it looks like somebody's writing on the screen. But he used his image to write a very influential set of books that are now not used just in America, but all throughout the world. All throughout the world, these books are used because it's from an image perspective. If Stanley Tookie Williams could do it, why can't we do it as teachers? Right? He demanded while on death row that he be heard, that he make a difference. He set his core competencies on death row. So there's no excuse for us not to set our core competencies. All right. And I want to now talk about first order thinking versus second order thinking. And basically, as one of my favorite cartoons is the Bugs Bunny show. And in the Bugs Bunny show, for all the young people, all you youngsters out there, this was a potpourri of different episodes of characters in the Warner Brothers series. And one of them was the Road Runner versus the Wild E. Coyote, genius. Well, us older folks know that Wild E. was a great genius. He would come up with all these ideas to try to catch the Road Runner, right? But none of them worked, right? Why? Because he didn't think them through. He wasn't reflective. He didn't use reflection. He didn't tap into his second order thinking, okay? Whereas the Road Runner not only used his speed, but also was able to outsmart the Coyote on every turn because the Road Runner was always using his second order thinking. And that's what first order thinking and second order thinking is really all about. First order thinking for teachers is really about solving immediate problems. It's the do of teaching. All right. So in first order thinking, it's always a yes and no. It's always yes and no questions, or the answers are very concrete. Mr. Ray, how can I improve my classroom management? My students, they're always talking to class. They're not paying attention. What can I do? Right? That's a first order thinking question. Okay. First order thinking questions always are grounded in EDEK. So teachers, from a teacher perspective, we always want somebody to tell us what to do. Mr. Ray, how can I improve my classroom management? Right? EDEK. So somebody comes down, you go to a professional development, somebody tells you what you do. Right? And then when it doesn't work, you say, oh man, that didn't work. Why? Because you're looking at it ethically and not amicably. You're not looking at it internally. You're not asking second order thinking questions. So second order, and as a result, what allows is fashion statements. And we're going to talk about fashion statements after the break. And in fashion statements, that's all these people will come to sell you something, to sell you the latest textbook, the latest program, to sell you something, right? Because they know you have a need and that you don't want to take the time to really address their need for yourself. So they say, we have the solution for you. And a lot of times those solutions don't work in our teaching. Second order is about deep, complex, and convoluted thinking. It looks to solve long-term, to solve or fix things long-term. It's long-term thinking. It's thinking ahead. It's as some people say, it's playing chess and not checkers. And second order thinking, there's no yes or no question answer. So you can't answer it with a yes and no. You can't answer it with a simple fix. There are many, many different things you have to do. The nuances, right? The nuances. Second order thinking is researchable. It allows us to continue to innovate. Whereas first order questions can be researched, but they're not really researchable questions. Again, second order is grounded in EDEK, how one feels, and it requires consistent reflection. All right, that was a lot. I do a lot of information. Let's go ahead and take a 2-minute brain break because I think I need it for myself. So let's take a 2-minute break. After that, I will open the floor to questions. And after the 2-minute break, I'll open the floor to questions, and then we'll move on to the next set of information. So take a 2-minute break.
I guess you were just, oh, you did. I didn't even.
Okay, everyone. We're gonna start back up. Brain break. Questions at this point. So you can raise your hand. Or anything that we talked about so far. You can raise your hand, I can acknowledge you. Or you can go ahead and ask the question. Questions?
Yeah, me. Hi.
Yes.
I just had a question about social responsibility. Like, how much social responsibility do you have toward your students if you are not actually interacting with them much online?
If you're interacting online?
No, I'm not interacting with them much online. Most of my interaction is in the classroom. So I'm wondering how much social responsibility I actually have towards that.
The reality is, core competencies is that you have to define, and that's what the point that I'm trying to do is that it has to be EDEK, right? You have to define the level of social responsibility you have for your students. And you have to make sure that is competitive provided. So you have to determine that for yourself. Like I'll give you a prime example. McDonald's. We were talking about McDonald's earlier. Responsibility does McDonald's have, right? They have to measure that against their competition. So it's not static, right? They're always, every couple of months, they're going to measure that social responsibility, and it's going to based on an edge, a competitive edge. So for us as teachers, one think about our image. So there's a lot of, as it relates to social responsibility, you have to figure that out for yourself. It has to be EDEK. You have to determine what is good for the situation you're in. What does the situation need? What do you want to provide? And what are other people doing? And how competitive do you want to be against other people? Does that answer?
As far as my,
I'm sorry?
yeah, it does answer my question. Is that competitive as far as what my students are going to be facing, or is that competitive me compared to other teachers?
So if I was done, if I was done with agreement, I would answer it this way. That was so that could be, so that's a researchable question, right?
Okay.
How is social responsibility? How does social responsibility, or how does my lack of social responsibility affect my students? Or how does my ideas of social responsibility how my students, right? That's something that and test out. We're going to talk about and information. We're not going to talk about that today. The next session we'll talk about how we find that information, and we'll go through the finding that information. But what you could do now, second order thinking, a question of, for your classroom where you are right now, how does my social responsibility affect my student? Right? So is that a yes or no question? No.
No.
There's a lot of answers there, right? And that's what you want. You want to you want to test those variables out. And like I said, next session we'll talk about how to collect the data.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to mute everybody and move on. Okay, so we had our brain break. We answered some questions. So I want to talk really briefly about fashion statements. Okay, and I mentioned it a couple of before the break. I mentioned fashion statements. So let me qualify that. What do I mean by fashion statements? So when we do not reflect and we think ethically, right? Have these external forces tell us what to do in our teaching and how to teach, right? And we focus on the do of teaching. Now, let me say this. I am not saying the do is not important. All right, let me be clear. I don't want to, and I'm not saying that first order thinking is not beneficial, okay? Yes, it is. And you will have first order questions, but your teaching or your reflection or your needs shouldn't be centered around first order, because you're always going to get stuck. Now, if there's an emergency, if there's an immediate need, you're going to think first order. How can I address this right now at the moment, right? In emergencies, we think first order because that's what we need to get through the situation. But we cannot be stuck in the rut of first order. We got to move on to second order thinking. Moreover, once you move to second order thinking, you go to third, fourth, fifth, sixth, so on and so forth. Now, with fashion statements, what happens is because so much of education is ethic, and not emic, there are a lot of people that want to sell us products, or there are a lot of people that want to tell us the latest and greatest thing in education. So all my educators who've taught for probably 5 years or more, you know this to be the case. Every year or every 2 years, there's a new thing that comes out, right? And so I have two of them in front of us now on this slide. Gardner's multiple intelligence, right? And then you have emotional intelligence, which is a big thing now. Emotional intelligence and multiple intelligence. Well, these are many. Let's talk specifically about multiple intelligence. Multiple intelligence theory has been found to be baloney. Okay. Now it doesn't mean that it doesn't have any value, because it has some value, but even Gardner himself has said, don't try to apply this in your teaching. Multiple intelligence theory comes from EDEK. It comes from this idea that we have to feel warm and fuzzy about education. We have to measure it. That it's not a complex world, right? Diane Lawson Freeman said, complexity theory. It's a complex world. And guess what? The reality is students don't learn because we teach. Diane Lawson Freeman, Willis, and what they learn is not necessarily what was taught. It's a complex world. You can't measure education. Education in teaching and learning is not EDEK, it is emic. But because in so many schools we present it as EDEK, we have people, researchers, and for-profit organizations that want to sell us something or want to come down from the mountainside and tell us what to do. And often we fall victim to things like multiple intelligence. Now, multiple intelligence may be good for student profiling, and that is about it. If you try to start to use multiple intelligence as a methodology, it's wrong. It's baloney. And anyone who tries to do it is riding the fashion train. Okay? So the key here is to be very, very careful about what comes down the pipe. And this is why you have to reflect on everything. When you go to a professional development, sit there and listen, but test it out. And again, next session, we'll talk about how to test it out. But test those theories out. But be very careful before you start to just jump in with both feet. thinking ethically, thinking that you, I read this book, or I saw this video on YouTube, or this guy came to, or this lady came to give us a professional development on this. Oh, this is going to be our saving grace. A lot of the times, it may be good. It may have worked for that person's context, for that organization's situation, for their research, but it may or may not work for yours. And then also remember that all that glitters is not gold. Some people are going to sell you some things that are straight up baloney. Multiple intelligence theory is baloney. And researchers have time and time again has said it's baloney. It's a complete hoax. And where multiple intelligence theory really came from was the idea that it's this warm and fuzzy idea, and it really came from a political perspective, right? That all students can learn, and all students have some type of strength, intellectual strength, and that intellect is not just IQ, just being able to read and write. It's beyond that. Well, okay, I will buy that, but the reality is all intelligence are not created equal. And if I go back real quick, if I go back to the previous slide real quick, a person who's logic smart, a person who's interpersonal, a person who's verbal and linguistic is more than likely, there are more jobs set for him or her than a person who's bodily kinesthetic or musical. A person who's visual spatial can be a pilot, okay? A person who's strongly intrapersonal, they're going to have less opportunities. All intelligence are not created equal. And our job, and another point that people fail to talk about when they talk about multiple intelligence theory, is that we all have all 8 of these, or 9. It started off with 7 and now it's 9. We all have all of these 9 qualities in us. It's just we lean towards one as a strength, more of a strength. But we all have a little musical, we all ability in us. We all have a little bodily kinesthetic. So our job as teachers is open up those possibilities that Dr. K talked about, and make sure that we walk that line to, if we know that we have somebody who's very musical in a class, to say and recognize that, and that's fine, but also make them prepared for this complex world that Dr. Diane Losser-Freeman talked about. Because the reality is, if we tell this person, oh, you're going to be, your musical abilities is your intellect, and go off and be prosperous, they're going to, most of the time, unless they get lucky, right? Or they have extreme ability that's competitive, more competitive than other people, most of the time that's not going to be how they survive and able to take care of their families. So we really need to be very careful with these fashion statements that always come down the pike. And this is why reflection is extremely important. And this is an example of something I pulled where somebody is trying to create objectives based on multiple intelligence. And Gardner himself said, you should not do that, right? That's a no-no. All right, now, John Hattie to the rescue, right? So this is Australian researcher named John Hattie. And so you can say, well, Ray, well, how do I know what's a fashion statement, what's not? Oh, okay, John Hattie's here to help you. So John Hattie has something called visual learning. He's been doing it over the last 20 years or so. And what he's done for you is he's giving you 250 plus influences that affect student achievement. And you can look at it yourself. You can pull this online yourself. But if you look, let's see if I can zoom a little bit. He has blue, like a light blue, green, yellow, and red. Blue is what is potentially considered to accelerate student achievement. The light blue is potential to accelerate student achievement. So dark blue is considerably, and then light blue is potential. Green is likely. Yellow is to have a small effect, and red is actually to be adverse. So basically what Hattie says, so you can understand these numbers, because we're not going to go over them, we don't have time. So you can understand these numbers, okay? He says that, he calls these numbers, you see these numbers, ES? He calls those effect size. The ES stands for effect size, okay? And what he says is that basically what Hattie says is that almost everything that we do is good for learning as teachers, right? And that goes back to something earlier I said that came from Dr. K and Prabhu. They said that you're a good teacher because you were a student at one point. So, you know, there's very few things, if any, that you do that's negative towards learning, that's negative to learning. So most of us are at least yellow. Whether you have any formal teaching background, most of you go in a classroom and you're at least yellow, right? Now, what Hattie says, we have to get to blue, that dark blue. That's what Hattie says. So in order to understand this chart and read it for yourself so you can process and reflect on it for yourself, he says the effect size pivot point should be 0.4. So anything that's 0.4 or higher would be, is moving towards being considerably or being effective. So 0.4 would be green, I believe. So no. 0.4 is actually light blue, right? So you should be going light blue, right? And you notice that all of the things that are under 0.4 is yellow, right? And things that are over 0.4 are light blue, and then things that are very high are dark blue. So what Hattie says is at least you should be doing things, these variables, these activities that are at least 0.4 or higher. So 0.4 or higher is where you want to be on these influences. And you can read them for yourself when you get a chance. Okay, and like I said, if you want this slide, I will gladly give you this slide. You can compare them to the notes that you're taking. So Hattie to the rescue. So when you get a professional, you attend a professional development, or you go to a workshop, or you see a video online, whatever the case may be, what you can do is measure it against Hattie's effect size, and he updates the list every year. So why does he update the list? I don't know, say it right. Why does he update the list every year? He updates the list every year because of what Dr. K tells us, that we must continuously improve. We must continuously and consistently reflect. So what Dr. Hattie does is he reflects on his visual learning. This is called visual learning, okay, or visible learning. So he reflects on his visible learning. So he doesn't just, so he has one for 2005, 2006, 2007. And you can see over the years how it changes. Why? Because the students change. Why? It's what Dr. K said. Our students are unique, right? So we need to be practical. So he's being practical. So he's always reflecting. You see how this theme of reflection and thinking is playing in all aspects of teacher improvement? Hopefully you guys see that. And I'm driving that point home. Right? So now that we talked about that, we can move into really quickly about Ron Richhart. And Ron Richhart has what we call the cultures of thinking. And they're part of their a peer group. We dealt all last year with the cultures of thinking. And basically, what Ron Richhart and his cultural thinking, or his project is called Project Zero. He says there are 8 influences that impact the classroom. Time. So he's making sure that you give time. When you commit yourself to something, make sure that you give the appropriate amount of time for that thing. Don't rush through. And I know this goes against a lot of what you experience in classes in your schools, because you have pacing, and the academic coordinator or your department chair or your department coordinator is telling you you need to be on this unit now, or you need to be in this chapter, or you need to be on this page. But what Richhart says is no, give the appropriate amount of time for students to to give responses. When you ask the question, give the student time to answer it. Give students time to deal with it, to play with it, to practice. And that's what we do as teachers. We create opportunities for students to practice. We create opportunities for students to practice. So Warren Richard talks about time, modeling, right? You have to model what you want. You have to inspect what you expect. You have to model the behavior that you expect. Modeling. Language. You have to use appropriate language. You have to use the vocabulary that elicits the response that you want, that describes. You have to use vocabulary that gets the students to reflect on their thinking, right? You have to use the right vocabulary. So make sure we're mindful of what we say and the language that we use. The environment, making sure that the environment is appropriate and facilitates learning. The interactions that we have are not EDEK, but they're EMIC. They're not EDEK, but they're EMIC, and that we respect what students have to say by giving them the time, by considering their point of view. Right? We talked about point of view earlier. Routines. Routines is going back to what Diane Lawson Freeman talked about, giving iterations, right? So routines is not repetition, but routines are the frameworks, is that micro teaching and all those things that we do, and the routines to get students to think independently, to think as a team, and create them as a routine in your classroom. Expectations. It is what agenda do you have for your students? And is it based on them? And then opportunities. How many opportunities can you take advantage of that will promote learning in the classroom, that will promote self-efficacy in the classroom, that will promote individual thinking for your students and thinking for yourself, so that we have a whole learning environment that is EMIC based. Okay, and this is explanation. You guys can read this as you guys go along. Time, opportunity, structure, language, modeling. Okay, you guys can read this on the slide yourself. So, again, reflection, doing a self-assessment, inspecting yourself. And if you click on this link, there's a hyperlink here. Richard actually gives us a self-assessment form based on all of the 8 forces that affect our classrooms. So these are things that we can think about. So again, just if you want this slide, send me an email and I will forward this slide to you, and you can download or print out this and put this a part of your thinking routine to help you move towards reflection. Okay, because we need to think about our teaching in order to improve the services that we provide to our students. Right? I'll be remiss to talk about something that I don't hear a lot about in ESL, and that is backwards mapping. And I'm gonna I know I'm running over, so I'm rushing through a little bit here. Backwards mapping is basically how you should be lesson planning, how we should be creating curriculum, how we should be creating our scope and sequences based on the curriculum. And backwards mapping is how even businesses. So let me explain it this way: when you go into a supermarket, when they design a supermarket, they start with the cashier first. So they put in the cashiers first, and they think about how do they get the shopper to negotiate the floor plan of the supermarket, starting from the cashier. That's called backwards mapping. So we don't just do it in education, but we do it in corporations and businesses, and we also do it in the military. It's called backwards mapping. So starting with, remember earlier I said inspecting what you expect, right? So starting with that expectation, what backwards mapping allows us to do is it allows us to stop, it allows us to reflect. Oh, there go that word reflection again. And then as a result, because we're reflecting, we're asking second order thinking questions, and we're making intelligent decisions. Again, just like everything else, backwards mapping has to be student focused. Right? So here's kind of a infograph on backwards mapping. You start with the desired result. So in a supermarket, the desired result is to get the customer at the cash register, right? So that's where we start, and then determine the acceptable evidence to get the cashier there. So what assessment, how can we assess, and what prior experiences that we have. That's why we need to know. That's why it's important for us to know the academic theory. And then the last thing is then actually doing their planning based on your experiences, or you're creating a lesson plan. Okay. So then that begs another question about expectations. What do our students expect if it's supposed to be student driven? What do they expect? So this means that we must student profile. We have to student profile. If you're not student profiling, you cannot effectively reflect. You need to think about who your students are and why they're there. And also remember that you're not a part of the crew. All right. A lot of people think that, because we come from the same area, or we have the same religion, or we're the same ethnicity, or you're not. You're their teacher, and by virtue of your age, you're not one of them. They don't see you as one of them. They see you as teacher. All right. So a lot of people say, I don't need to student profile from student profile because I know my students, we're the same religion and we come from the same ethnic background, the same tribe. Wrong answer. You're older than them. You're 10 years older than them. You're 5 years older than them. You're older than them. They don't see it the way you see it. So what do we need to do when in order to student profile? We really need to do not only student profile and knowing who the students are and why they're there. We also need to look at doing needs analysis, figure out are they there for instrumental reasons, right? Are they there to pass the hours, or to get a good job, or to go to America to have a better life? Are they there for integrative reasons? Are we there for their friends? They want to learn English because their friends know English, and they want to be around, have that in their back pocket. Not really instrumental. It's just something they want to know. It makes them feel good to know that they're doing it. Basically, it's more EDEK, you can say. EDEK and EDEK together, because they're really doing it to be a part of the crew, a part of the team, to fit in with society. Then you also have to look at it from intrinsic or extrinsic. Intrinsic would be internal, so how it makes them feel, right? So they're there because they want to be a doctor because it makes them feel good. Extrinsic would be they want to be a doctor because it would make their mother feel good. You see the difference? It's important for you to know that, so you can add that into your pot of reflection as a teacher, so you can make those second order decisions. All right, another brain break. I gave you some information to think about that there. Take 2 minutes, decide if you have any questions about anything that I talked about, and then I will field any questions. So take a 2-minute brain break.
I have a question.
Okay, wait till after the brain break. Give me one more minute.
I want to know.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. So after the brain break.
That a person is not into a teaching career, but he has done the research. So, can there be a further career in this, what you are teaching right now, in core competency?
All right. We'll answer that in about 30 seconds. I want to get clarity on your question.
American.
The thing is that the person is not a teacher. His competency in research, I'm talking about myself. She is a competent researcher. So can she further go with what you are teaching, creating lesson plans and doing all sorts of assessments, self-assessments of students to gain this, what you are teaching, core competency?
Right, yeah, so if I understand your question correctly, everyone, regardless of what profession you have, should have a set of core values that you operate from. But core competency in teaching is really about the identity that you have in the classroom. Okay. At Hattie's, I'm gonna mute because there's a lot of background.
Okay.
Okay, so if I understand your question correctly, you're saying, I think you're saying, and I'll give you the opportunity to correct me, but I think you're saying that if you're not a teacher that's in front of students, do you still have to have a core competencies? Well, everyone should have guiding values and principles. When we talk about core competencies as it relates to teaching, it's about creating that teacher respect, so students know that you are unique and that you care about them and that you provide a unique service that's different than the next teacher that they may experience in that day or in that school year or in their lives. That when they think about you, they think about you from the aspects that you were able to communicate well, that you had social responsibility, that you were self-aware, that you were knowledgeable, that you were an expert, that you cared about them. Okay, how you define that, how you mold that, you have to define that for yourself, and you need to do that through reflection. I think that answers your question. I'm going to unmute you and let me know. Does that answer your question? Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Almost finished. All right, Sonia.
Always great. Thanks a million.
All right. I'll give Meryl a chance.
All right, Morale.
Raynor, I wanted to ask you, when you're an online teacher, when you teach a class of students online, for a amount of time to get to know each student, but I would assume that
तो बस अम्मा भी घर में एक रात के पैसे लेने लगे इसी लाया एक रात रुको तेरे पैसे दो
1 second. Hold on a second.
Sorry, I'm okay. Is it possible to mute other people
Yeah, I'm
while?
going to mute everyone else. Hold on a second. Hold on.
Okay.
That's why I want you guys to raise your hand if you have a question. That way I can just unmute you. All right, go ahead, Sonia.
Okay. Okay, great. When you're an online teacher and you're teaching a class of students, you'd obviously want to get to know each of those students' backgrounds, personalities, strengths, weaknesses, interests, etc., so that you can meet that student's needs. Would it be a good, I know that when you're in a classroom, you can pick up on students' personalities and needs and things like that. Is that possible in your experience in an online classroom situation? And would it be a good idea to create assignments that would give the teacher insight as to what the students' needs are, or would you just pick that up from asking questions in a classroom situation?
I think it's so. I'll give you the Donald Freeman response. Donald Freeman would say, "Dude, if you're asking EDEK related questions, if you're asking researchable questions, if you are picking up the nuances of that student doing that online experience, you will get a part of it. But to answer your question from the Ray answer is that I think you can student profile better online than you can in a traditional classroom. And here's my logical, my reason why I feel that way. Because they're normally in their personal space, they're more likely to open up to you. There's no one else around them. They can send you a private message. They can open up because they're in their personal environment that they feel safe in. Whereas in a classroom, they may not feel that safe opening completely up. I'll give you a prime example. At the university that I teach, students don't ask questions, and some of the teachers who teach on the university level may experience this too. Students will ask questions in the classroom. It's rare that a student will ask a question in the classroom if he doesn't know something. Now, the smarter students will because they're confident. But the students who are not, quote unquote, the smart students, they won't ask a question in the classroom. Okay? What they'll do is they'll come to my office hours and they'll ask me a question. And then my response is, well, why didn't you ask that question during the class period? And they kind of look at you like, I don't want to come across as dumb to my friends. So now imagine trying to get what they like or why they're there out of them in that environment. You may either get an artificial answer or not an answer at all, okay? Because they don't want to share in front of other people. We got to remember that there's a lot of strange nuances that are occurring in that dynamic. So that's why it's important that we think about EDEK, right, to our experiences as students. There are things going on. A lot of times we think they all like each other. Well, they all don't really like each other. They all are influenced by each other, but they all really don't like each other. And they're all not each other's friends, right? They all may seem like they each other. They may all have kind words for each other, but there are other things going on internally that as teachers, we can't see because we're EDEK then. At that point, we're EDEK because we're not them. We're not in their crew. No matter how much we want to feel like we're them, we're not them. So when it comes to profiling, I would say that an online experience gives a student to open up more and tell you more about themselves because they're in an environment where they're not being judged. And as long as you come across as someone who doesn't judge, they're more likely to open up. Now, you could come across as somebody who doesn't judge in a traditional classroom, and they still won't open up. Why? Because there are other people around. This is why we normally say when you want to do student profiling, well, you do student profile in many ways. There are many ways to do it. But if you're trying to get that intimate information, you normally do one-on-one, right? If you want them to really open up. The problem is, if you have 30 students in your class, what's the likelihood of you doing one-on-one? And you have all these other things you have to do. So that becomes the challenge. That truly becomes the challenge. So I think, to answer your question, I think online allows us to profile better. Any other question? Morel, did you have a question? Let me unmute Morel. I don't know why.
I think you need to unmute me first.
No,
I mean, to mute me first and then maybe go to Morel.
Yeah, I thought I muted you though. Hold on a second. Where are you? There you go. So we'll meet you, and then we'll go to Morel. Yeah, it looks like that's gonna work. No, still not working. Morel, raise your hand if you have a question. I don't know why it's not allowing me to unmute Morel. Okay, Morel, if you have a question, we could take it offline. I want to just continue to move on. Any other questions? Raise your hand.
No, sorry, did I miss anything? Right? No, I don't have any questions. No, all is good.
Okay, I thought you had a question. All right. Sounds good. Let's go.
Just saying many thanks. Merci en français.
All right. Let's go on. We're almost finished, guys. We're almost finished. And then you guys can go about your wonderful day. All right. Last hit. Lesson planning. Wow, Ray, you finally got to the lesson planning. Yeah, so here we are. Everything that we talked about into consideration. Now let's look at lesson planning. Now, my question to you is, how now does this information about lesson planning, how has what we talked about shaped how you might lesson plan? That's something to think about, right? So what are the key components of a lesson plan? Well, you should have, if you're not going to have anything, you should have at least these things in a lesson plan. And there's no one right way to write a lesson plan. But for sure, you should have a set of objectives, right? And those objectives should be SMART. And you should have a motivational activity and a warmer. And the reason why we want to have a motivational activity and a warmer is some of the reasons that we talked with Sonia about, getting the students to open up. We don't know what the day they had or the experiences they had before they walked in your classroom. So we want to get them in learning mode. We really want to get them out of survival mode into warming mode, into learning mode. And that's why motivational activities and warmers are critical to learning. And then you want to have context and modeling. So an opportunity where you model and you create context for whatever you're teaching, and that should be in your lesson plan. That act of context and modeling. And then opportunities for control practice. Okay, and what do we mean by control practice? This is when the teacher is there to guide the student. The teacher is there every way. The student is practicing, and the teacher is watching. The teacher is participating in the practice. And here, this is where micro teaching comes in. Teacher-teacher, teacher-student, student-teacher, student-student, class interaction, and control practice. And then you should have an opportunity in your lesson plan that talks about expansion. How can we take it a step further, that information a step further? That's what Diane Lawson Freeman called iterations. So doing it a different way, not repetition, but doing it a different way. And then you may have next in your lesson plan some opportunities for listening, speaking, reading, or writing. Again, it depends on what you're teaching. And then you want to have a communicative activity where students work together if you have time. And then independent study. Independent study should be grounded in differentiated instruction, could be blended learning, it could be something like DARE, drop everything and read. It could be student research, where students go out and do research. That really depends on the situation that you have in hand. Now, all the things I think about, I mean, all the things I just mentioned, these are just the core variables that you should have in your lesson plan, in any lesson plan. And this is whether you teach English, or you teach math, or you teach biology, or you teach music. You should have these aspects of these. Yes, even in music, there should be some writing that you do. Even in physical education, you can use the same structure when you're lesson planning. So two things I want to really hit here. One is that you should lesson plan, because regardless of what situation is, always lesson plan. And two, you need to reflect on that plan, and that plan, as a result of reflection on your plans, it should be backwards map, starting with where you want the student to be. What do you want the student to be able to do at the end of that lesson? Backwards mapping. Same thing like when they create or they lay out designs for supermarkets. They start with the cashier first. Make sure your objectives are SMART. All right, and that means SMART means specific. All right, that means it's a specific thing, a task that each objective is looking for. That task is measurable. All right, so you cannot have an objective that is the student will be able to know how to count, or the student will be able to understand Romeo and the plot of Romeo and Juliet. These are not measurable tasks. You cannot measure know, you cannot measure understand. I would even say, you can't even say the student will be able to practice. No, that doesn't even work. Tell me how they're going to practice. The student will be able to count using manipulatives from 1 to 10. The student will be able to count on their fingers from 1 to 10. The student will be able to underline the subject in the sentence. The student will be able to circle the verb in the sentence. All right. The next is A, attainable. You should be able to do it. It should be appropriate. The student should be able to be within that, have the ability to do it. It shouldn't be out of their realm of ability. All right. It should be achievable for the student. Okay. So, we're not going to ask the student to, in a biology class, we're not going to ask the student to do heart surgery on a frog. All right. That was a goofy analogy. That's not going to be attainable, right? We're not going to ask students to, in a shop class, we're not going to ask students to build the Coliseum, right? We're going to ask them to do things that are attainable. R is relevant. It should have some relevance to their life. Okay, it should have some relative. It should be relevant to their life. So somebody was sharing something very interesting with me today. They were saying that their wife is homeschooling their son, and the mother was teaching the son how to write. So the mother was having the son do handwriting drills. And the son said, "Mother, why am I writing? I don't need to know how to write because I can talk in my tablet and my tablet will do all the writing for me." And guess what? He is absolutely right. In the age of access, in this age of technology, handwriting is not relevant to him. It's not important for him. So why are we teaching it? Like when I was in middle school, I took a typewriting class. No longer relevant. There are no longer typewriters anywhere. I haven't seen a typewriter in the last 20 years. right? And then T is timely. You should be able to do whatever that task is within that time frame. So if you have a 50-minute class, you should be able to conduct that lesson plan within the framework of that class. All right. The other thing that we must consider, especially when we are backwards mapping, because we're thinking about objectives, where we want the student, what we want the student to be able to do, is we have to consider Bloom's, right? And the great thing about Bloom's forces us to reflect. So when we are creating these objectives, we have to reflect on who our students are, what their needs are. So let me go back one slide. Okay. In order for you to hit the R, relevance, right? And think about whether it's really relevant, you have to know why your student is there. Are they there for instrumental reasons? Are they there for integrative reasons? Is it intrinsic reasons they're there? Is it extrinsic reasons why they're there? In order to tap into their relevance. And then that will determine how far up the higher order skills they go. And our job ultimately to prepare them for Diane Lawson Freeman's complex world, complexity theory, we're forced, it's our responsibility to get them as high as possible up on a higher order thinking skills. Because the higher they go on the skills, evaluation, and the ability that they're able to synthesize and evaluate, the more likely they're going to be able to take on the challenges of the complex world. And in order for us to do that, we have to be thinking all the time about the students that are right in front of us at the moment. So there has to be a continuous thinking process, which we call reflection, or we call action-based research or teacher research. So it becomes the teacher as a researcher. So the last point I want to make is about transitions. And we trying to get students to the highest gear possible, okay, in everything we do. And in order to get them to that 6th gear, we have to reflect. We have to take in many things in consideration. So having a system, a routine of continuous reflection, developing a set of core competencies from that reflection will allow us to do the first order things like lesson planning. Lesson planning can be is often for many people a first order activity when it should be taken as a second order activity. And then the do things are first order, and they become quite easy as time goes on. Well, that's my talk for today. Here are the resources that I use to give this talk. You'll be able to access those resources. A lot of those resources I included in the emails that I sent to you. I will open up, yes, whew, that was a lot, right? So I will open up for the last bit of questions. Let's see where I'm at here. So let me unmute everyone.
I can write in any order. No, you have to write in your own order.
Got it. Any final questions? Just raise your hand if you had a final question. No final questions? Raise your hand. Okay. Right. So with that in mind, what I would like you to do is just reflect on today's conversation. All right. And think about how reflection or think about the core competencies that you would like to develop within yourself. Think about the teacher that you want people to see. I think therefore I am. I think therefore I am. And if you can, go to my website, www.calltoenglish.com, and in the blog, just write your reflection. Because again, the point here is to say that your opinion is, your point of view is valuable. It is. No matter what happens at your schools, I know no one asks you your point of view, but you are very, your opinion, your point of view is more valuable than any researchers, than any principal. The only other point of view that's more valuable than yours are the students. And we consider the students' point of view in our reflection. Okay? So have the confidence to know that you are a very important piece to this process of learning. That you have to create your point of view in order to gain core competencies. Think about those things. Okay, we have some things written here. I didn't even see the chat. So think about those things, and if you can, go onto my website, www. I'll put it in the chat here, calltoenglish.com. Leave it in the blog area, and we can talk about those in the next session. The next session will be next Monday, January the 7th at 8 o'clock. I'll send, I think I have to send another link. So I'll do another link. Next week, we'll talk more about what's going on in the future in education, and we'll talk about how to get that data. So how to reflect to get that data that we talked about today. So now that we reflect and we know we have the researchable questions, we know what we want to ask for, how do we get it? So we'll talk about that next week, and we'll talk more about the future of education. And that's it. If no one has any questions, thank you for the time. I'm sorry that I ran over. I ran over a lot. I'll do a better job next week and getting us finished right at 9:30. Thank you for your time again. If you have any questions, you can WhatsApp me. You can email me. I think everyone has my email, WhatsApp. You can leave a message in the blog on the website. And have a great night. Be somebody's champion. See you guys later.